Thanks, everybody, and thank you for being with me. Let's just start with that. One of the things that I think I'm going to be doing a little bit more of is just do a general feed about the politics that's been happening in the last week. And I'd be interested to know what it is that you think about any of the things that I say. And I'd certainly like to think that you could subscribe to my channel as well. That would be rather nice. So one of the things I want to kick off with today is that last week there was quite a kerfuffle about the immigration issue, and that is particularly asylum seekers being released into the community as a result of a High Court decision. And I think there are a few things that we need to cover in relation to this. Number one, did the government know about the pending decision? Claire O'Neill says not necessarily. Did the opposition know about this or have anything to do with the detaining of these people anyway? Yes, they probably did under Morrison's government. So where does this leave us now? One of the things that we need to pick through, I think, is whether or not asylum seekers or those people that are held in detention and cannot find a country, or we cannot find a country for them to be returned to, whether those people themselves need to be released into our community, because is it possible, is it realistic for us to detain people for the rest of their natural lives where a crime hasn't specifically been committed or where they have actually served the sentence for whatever crime has been committed? So it seems to me we have one set of rules for us in the community that are Australian citizens or that are on visas or whatever the case might be. But we have another rule for those people that sit outside of that particular category. We have a rule now for those people, or we have had in the past, I should say, a rule for those people whom we thought were asylum seekers, even though some of those people that will be released and have been released have not specifically committed a crime here in Australia or haven't committed a crime anywhere else for that matter. It just appears that they can't find a country to which they could return. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us in a bit of a quandary, because right at the moment there seems to be a challenge to the current decision by the Liberal and the Labor Party to find ways to limit the behaviour of some of these people by giving them ankle bracelets to restrict where they go, what they do, who they see, who they have in their home, whether they can work or not. Those sorts of restrictions are placed on these people, remembering that many of them perhaps have not specifically committed a crime. Their crime was trying to seek asylum in Australia. Heaven forbid. So where are those people going to go? Who knows? But they are now likely to challenge the current decision. So the problem we had was that a rushed decision, a decision which I believe the government knew was probably likely to be challenged and likely to be thrown out. So where will it place the government and the coalition? Because they went along with all of this. In fact, they were the ones that put forward the 6 amendments, which have gone to this particular part of the legislation. And as a result of all of that, we now have possible challenges to the court, which are likely to be overturned. And so what happens then? Well, we're going to have a mess, that is for sure. But there's an interesting article that I want to cite in The Guardian, came out the other day. And I'll just talk a little bit about this because it throws a little bit more light on this particular issue. And I'll try and find it. It's the wrong screen. There we go. So this is where Peter Dutton can argue that there's a will to detain these people, and there must be, if there's a will, there must be a way. But the court said otherwise, and they're likely to be hefty compensation. There's likely to be a hefty compensation bill. So a lot of these people could potentially argue that they were incarcerated illegally, and because some of them were there for hefty periods of time, 5, 6, 7, 10 years sometimes, that because those incarcerations were illegal, they could receive some sort of compensation. So I'm really curious as to how the government's going to respond about that. A remarkable thing happened at the height of lower house debate about Labor's emergency bill to respond to the High Court ruling on definite detention. The coalition had been hammering the Albanese government for not being better prepared in the event of losing the case. We know all of that. We've heard of that in Parliament. The opposition leader, Peter Dutton, suggested the critical date was June because that was when a preliminary hearing suggested the case was on shaky grounds. Now, they also must have known while they were in government that this was also probable and likely, and they would have received a similar advice to that of the Liberal Party. I just want to take down at the bottom here because I think this is the bit that I find the most interesting. The Solicitor General, Stephen Donoghue, said as much as the second day of hearings, warning the Commonwealth would be exposed to inevitable damages, claims for false imprisonment. These claims would be indefendable in cases where the government conceded the people had detained while it was impossible to deport them, he said. Both sides suspected indefinite detention could fall, and they now expect demands for compensation. The price of the detention regime has been decades of lost liberty, hopelessness, and likely a hefty bill for taxpayers. And this is what I've been saying, that at the end of the day, this is likely to be an expensive process for which the government, in turn you and I, are likely to pay. The other thing I want to make, and the other issue for me also, is that when they talk about, and the government talks about it, the Liberal Party and the Nationals, they talk about the cost of these people being in the community because housing has to be found for them. They're not allowed to work, so who knows what happens there. They get some sort of benefit or payment from the government because they are unable to work. And who pays for that? Well, we pay for it. And it just seems to make much more sense given that most of these people that are being released don't fall into that horrible category of pedophiles and rapists and these other sort of demonising terms that the Liberal Party want to place on them. But most of them will be people that just simply couldn't find another place to go. And those people, why isn't it that they can't work? Why is it that they'd have to have all these restrictions placed on them simply because to the Liberal Party, they all fall into that one horrible category of being these terrible people. They're not. I find a lot of these comments that are made by the right are fascists, racists type comments, and we need to see them for what they are, and we need to see the total picture for what it is, which is really about a group of people needing to be released into the community because the High Court has said so, and that not all of them fall under the category, the demonisation type terms that we get from the Liberal Party and from the right wing in particular, and particularly people like Sky News. So, okay, I'm going to leave that particular issue aside right now. Hold on. No, I'm not. I actually want to talk about this, which was another article in the Saturday paper. So I'll just talk briefly about this one and let me know what you think. The legislation that follows is always thin and little scabby. It's always a secure. Over time, the whole Migration Act has become like this, patched up and half-healed. Occasionally, as happened last week, the High Court will attempt to clean some of the grit from the wound. Basic principles will be argued, a modicum of decency might be advanced. Invariably, the Parliament will respond with more legislative scarring. And I think that this is a terrific way of putting it because this is about trying to get this process, the migration process, to work effectively, and not only that, but also to get it to work in what I think is a more humane way. And they struggle particularly to do this. So, what do you think about this particular issue? Are you a little bit more broad-minded? Are you looking at it from a wider perspective? And do you think that some of the... So the point is, there are some people who should be locked up, who should not be out, end of story, whatever. Now, should we have been able to identify those specific people and have restrictions on them, right? Even though some of those people have actually been through the court process and they've done their time. They've been sentenced. They've done whatever the sentence is required of them, and they've been released as what would happen in the normal community. And as I said in a previous podcast, we have many of those people in our community, Australian citizens who are in the community, who have committed all of those horrible crimes, served their sentence, and they're out. Why couldn't that same standard apply to these people too? They may be here under different circumstances, clearly, but they are still human, and we need to still respond in a humane way. And also, we need to identify the fact that many of these people that will be released have not got those dark histories and those dark past, those senses of criminality that those people that have been demonised have. So we need to be very clear about all of that. Now, I'm going to move on to another topic, which is really who's voting and for whom. Now, it has become apparent, and I've said this before in a post, that there have been strong indicators that young people are voting differently than what older people are voting. And as a result of that, it is becoming clearer, I think, that young people are further to the left than others. Now, I've been thinking about the reason why this might be so. And number one could be that a lot of young people now are better educated than, say, my generation was, that young people seek influences in their life. The most obvious one, I think, is Taylor Swift. Young people are thinking about where the environment's going, what's going to happen to them in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And whereas people my age think, well, I figure I won't be here. It'll be as simple as that. But a lot of people, younger people, are now thinking about the world differently, I guess, than what we did. Even though I can remember back in the 70s, there were certainly protests around the Vietnam War, anti-Moritan marches and so forth, which my generation took part in and made changes, significant changes, as a result of all of that. So perhaps young people are doing something similar today. They're thinking a little bit more about where their future is and what it's going to look like. But the issues are different because they're about climate change and a lot of other humane type issues that need to be addressed. So, wars and so forth as well. So what does this mean? Well, it does mean young Australians back entrenched political trend as new kind of adulthood. So I thought that's an interesting way of referring to it. A new kind of adulthood. Political scientists say there has been a fundamental shift in the experience of younger voters are so much different from previous generations. It is often said that people tend to become more politically conservative as they age. Not this black sheep, but nevertheless, that's what they tend to say. But millennials and Generation Z are bucking the trend, supporting the Indigenous voice to Parliament, for example, and backing centre-left and left parties at increasing rates in recent elections. Political scientists say there has been a fundamental shift, at least partly because the experiences of younger voters are so much different from previous generations. Now, I would argue differently because I know that, as I said, we were fighting for the moratorium and other things. So one of the things that was noticeable was that Green support younger voters is expanding. So Greens here represent this red bit, and it is clear from the other graphs from the ages that particular area is growing, and certainly support 18 to 34 for the Labor Party, which is the orange section here, is expanding at an increasing rate. So in the 1960s and 70s, younger voters, predominantly baby boomers, were likely to vote for the coalition as for Labor, but in 2022, just 22% of Gen Z voters and 27% of millennials voted for the coalition. By comparison, 36% of all voters and 45% of baby boomers backed the coalition. Support of the coalition among younger voters started trending away in the 1990s, said Dr. Sean Radcliffe, political scientist at Accent Research, who authorised a report on generational change. So, and there are obviously other reasons for this as well. One of them would be that young people are looking for better work. They're looking for they realise perhaps too that they'll never be able to, or it's unlikely that they'll be able to buy their own home. They're finding it difficult for rentals, and they probably see, believe it or not, they probably see the Labor Party as a better alternative around those options than the coalition, given that the coalition did bugger all over the last 9 years or so while they were in power. So the other stat I thought that was interesting was a number of young people that are living with their parents. So millennials are extremely high, baby boomers have bugger all, but naturally one would expect, unless the parents have moved back with them because the parents are elderly, but the millennials, lots and lots of millennials are still living with their parents and living with their parents in much later years either. So as a sense of that, I guess they might be feeling a little bit more comfortable. Who knows what that is for millennials, but it is interesting to note that the younger people are probably more likely to be progressive than the older farts such as myself, even though I am progressive. Now, there is another interesting article that came up in the Saturday paper that I want to have a look at, and this is about how Dutton is tracking in terms of confronting the issues that face us and the way he goes about expressing those issues and confronting the Labor Party. And so I just wanted to quote a little bit from the Saturday paper in relation to this, because I think it is quite relevant. Perception, as the wisdom goes, is reality in politics, and Dutton is hell-bent on a mission to shape how the public, this is important, how the public sees Albanese. On Monday, facing the Prime Minister for the first time after Albanese returned from China and the Pacific Islands Forum in Tavula, Dutton accused Albanese of breaking every promise made on cost relief before the last election. Why, Dutton asked, are Australians paying the price for a distracted and out-of-touch Prime Minister failing to focus on the real issues facing Australians? That's what Dutton said. It is easy enough for an opposition to feed these sentiments, and you could argue Dutton would be failing at his duty if he didn't do it. But it doesn't really take him far beyond amplifying the problem while not, and this is the important thing, while not coming up with a coherent solution. So it's easy for Dutton to be able to say, these are the things that you aren't doing, these are the promises that you've broken, to be critical, to be extremely critical of the government while still not offering solutions. And the troubling thing for me around that is that if you're in opposition hoping to become the government, surely solutions would be important. And it is evident from their voting patterns in Parliament that the opposition are not interested in solutions. There have been many solutions that have been put forward that the government has put forward, and Dutton and his team of cohorts and crazies have chosen not to support them. And the reason why they're not supporting them is for that very reason that I've just highlighted. It appears to be a winning strategy to not support somebody, to tell them that you are anti whatever it is that they're doing because they're incompetent. And as the Liberal Party the Labor Party keep explaining to the Liberal Party, is that while you're in government, there are many reasons why we would consider you incompetent, Morrison being one of them, robo-debt being another, and their immigration policy, as overseen by Dutton himself, proved how incompetent they actually were. And that side, but that doesn't resonate anymore, because if you're in government and you continually criticising the opposition who were in government, that has no significance it's not significant to the public anymore, because they don't have the power or authority, obviously the government does. So it's what the government does now that is important, not necessarily how incompetent the Liberals were when they were in power. But what is important from the Liberal perspective is that they can continually attack Albanese and his government and call them, tell them that they're absent, they're distracted, they're not facing the real issues without actually providing any solutions. It's a lazy man's way out, I reckon, but it is actually what the Liberal Party are now doing, and will be their strategy up until almost the next election in about 18 months' time. Because if it works, it will be as successful as they could be. It probably won't win them an election, but it might get them closer to them than what they have been in the last 18 months, where they've just been woeful. So they'll continue these attacks. They will be doing nothing to advance the situation in Australia. They will be they'll have a negative impact on any decision that's made within government. They will not support any of the legislation, no matter how good it is, from the Albanese government, because that would be running against this trend that they've now set up to criticise Albanese at every possible turn. And I just want to bring to another point, which is also, what is Labor's focus? What is it that they're planning to do in this period? There's another interesting article in New Politics, it is, which sort of highlights this point as well. So I'll bring that up. The Labor government the Labor government's focus lies primarily on reworking the economy to benefit the people and reversing what it perceives as unfavourable policies implemented by previous coalition governments. This endeavour is expected to be a significant test for the current administration, potentially shaping its term in office. While some supporters have voiced their dissatisfaction with the progress made thus far, politics is a delicate balance of achieving what is possible under prevailing circumstances. Despite the absence of revolutionary change, which has frustrated its supporters, the Labor government has successfully fostered stability during its first year. Nevertheless, there are areas that require immediate attention and improvement. Environmental concerns, such as coal mine approvals, must be reassessed as a higher priority, considering the urgency of addressing climate change. Additionally, the welfare system is still in need of substantial reform on multiple fronts. These issues are identified in crucial matters that demand swift action. So it isn't like the government's got a lot of work to do, and there's a lot of issues here that could determine their success or failure. So on one hand, we have the Liberal Party attacking Albanese for going on these trips overseas and saving our trade in terms of our trade deals with China, AUKUS defence and all that other sort of stuff, the Economic Forum, going to the Pacific in order to ensure our relationships are stable with our Pacific friends, and rather than the Chinese rather. So he's done all these things, which I think are commendable and which most Prime Ministers do, no matter what you stripe. So he's been able to do all those, but he will be bombarded from the right in relation to all of that. And I think that is of concern because he still has, and the government still has, all these other issues in relation to climate change. And they've just announced today they're struggling to meet their climate objectives by 2030 and the ones by 2050. So these are problems that are mounting for the Labor government. So let's see how that transpires, but let's be aware that, number one, young people are starting to vote for the left of politics, no longer persuaded to vote for the right. They will be the influencers because they will be the larger numbers in elections to come, and that the Labor Party are having to focus on issues that do impact young people. I think that's a priority. But the Liberal Party will continually attack the Labor for simply being Labor, I guess. And I wanted to, I think I'll probably just finish on that note. Just remember that if you wish to subscribe to my channel, please do so. Ring the bell for future notifications, and let me know what you think about anything that I've talked about down below. Thanks everybody for being with me. Take care, look after yourselves, and be safe.